How's it going, guys? Welcome back to TheBlueShifting. Welcome back to Muv-Luv Monday. We're still at it. Welcome to part 2. So last episode was a bit of like more introductory, I guess you could say, because there's likely going to be people who might find that and become introduced to the channel. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. But we're going to be jumping into this a lot more. I'm probably going to make a lot more reference to other parts of the Muv-Luv franchise, specifically Extra, Unlimited, and Alternative, because, you know, that's kind of the foundation of all of this. So just keep that in mind. If you haven't played those games, I might make references that could be spoilers. So, you know, I don't want to spoil stuff you haven't seen yet, because I highly recommend you play those games ASAP. Regardless of that, let's jump right into things, because last time we got introduced to Yui, who is part of a kind of like a test. They're in the simulators. They were testing the Railgun. And you helpfully informed me that the reason why they were in TSFs that looked a little different is because they're actually test models of a new type of TSF, which was really cool to see. I'm glad I noticed that they were different, but I didn't get the context of what I was really seeing there. So thank you for filling in that little detail. It definitely makes a lot of sense there. And we got this beauty that we're looking at right here. Look at that. Gotta admit, the color scheme for it's really nice. So we also got to see kind of Yui going through a harsh memory, recalling some of the events that transpired during the fall of Kyoto, which she was intimately involved with, and the fall of Yokohama, which she also was fairly intimately involved with. She feels a lot of personal guilt because of her station. She was put into positions that, although were dangerous, they still were far less dangerous than others of her, you know, age and experience were put into. And she still is, as a part of a family that has become known for innovative weapons development and testing. Whether it's something that's actually been accused of her, or if it was part of her like cognition, because some of you pointed out that maybe that interview was being so harsh because it was more the way she remembered it rather than like what it actually might have been. But again, I also think that we've seen that the press can be really harsh in the Muv-Luv universe, even though they're in this like oligarchical type of system. They do try and uphold things like freedom of press. Although, like, it's clear that they have a lot of control over the press, they still allow for some publications that can be critical. So there's a chance it was a real broadcast that she was able to witness. They somehow got access to some of her like personal interview files that were probably lodged with the IJF. So regardless of that, we saw pretty much a very traumatic actualization of her thoughts and emotions about the survival that she went through, the loss of her friends, the privilege that she felt like she had, and it was kind of compounded on the fact that like she is in a privileged position, and she still kind of is. I mean, if she's part of a weapons testing facility rather than actually having to fight on the front lines very often, if at all, that is privileged. I mean, it's necessary, it's important, but she might not see it that way because she feels like she's kind of been able to opt out and been able to take the easy road, which like I don't agree with, but that might be how she sees it. Anyway, that's a big long intro, but kind of just going over my thoughts about the first part. So let's jump in and see what kind of shenanigans we're getting up to today. All right, something feels off about the way the TSF moves. The machine drifts more than I expected it to when it came to a stop.
周囲はこのところずっと例の白縫いのシミュレーターに乗られていたからでしょう。
Yeah, so the Shiranui was a newer model of it.
1型兵は結構デタラメにいじったバランスの悪い機体ですから。その蓄積データが悪さをして感覚のズレを発生させてるんですよ。
なるほど。そうか。
God, one of the things you also got to say is like the Takamakatsuchi TSF battle armors, the suit armors, they freaking look awesome.
バランスの偏りに関しちゃ霊式もかなりのもんですが、機動格闘戦って軸でカリッカリに詰められてますからね。あっちこっち欲張った1型ヘイトは正反対です。
God, it reminds me so much. Like I could keep fanboying about like this, but I've said before I was a big fan of the Armored Core series, which is why I'm so freaking excited for that new Armored Core game that's coming out. Thank freaking goodness. I'm so stoked for that. It's going to be so nice to have a polished mech lovers mech game. We haven't had one in a long time. The closest we've had have been some Gundam games, but even then, like, they tended to be more like Dynasty Warriors and less about the mechs. It's more just about like big combat and big battles. I like the idea of having the customizable mech suits like they had. Armored Core 4 is the one I had the most experience with. And I still remember the design, I remember the name, and I remember the philosophy behind my design on that TSF. I don't think it's original per se, but for amongst my friend group, it was unique and individual, and it was something that I discovered on my own. And like there were no guides or anything that I read, and I just remember mine was designed to be kind of a back character. So like if I were in a squad of TSFs and I was inclined, based on my experience and the way I like to play video games, I wouldn't be a vanguard. I would be I can't remember what the position is called. It's the ones in the back where they tend to have the longer range weapons. Tama was this position. Not necessarily a sniper, but more about like overseeing the battlefield, watching for incoming threats from like the flanks and the rear, and being able to provide kind of like organizational support rather than like being the front line engaging TSFs. And that was the kind of build I got. But I remember I designed it specifically to have a overmassive core, like energy core, energy producing. And that made it like, even though I had a medium-sized frame and it like walked upright, it was incredibly heavy. And so I remember like you could affect the balance of it. And that's what made me think about this, is the fact that to compensate for the fact that the balance, like it was so heavy and hard to move. Like I wanted to make sure that if I was moving forward, I would have like as much momentum as possible. So I added augmentations to it, adding weight to the front and making its front profile like front heavy, because it meant that when I was moving forward, that was when it was in more balance. If I was moving forward constantly, and as I was moving forward, it would actually give me more speed and allow me to like advance on my targets much better. But the biggest bonus of the fact was that because the engine core was so strong, I effectively had unlimited flight power whilst using energy-based laser weapons. So I was able to move across the battlefield in crazy fast and not really having to stop for anything. And it meant that despite the fact that my mech appeared super slow and sluggish, on battlefield in actual effect, it was one of the fastest and most persistent on the battlefields. And I loved it. It was so much fun, especially when I got to fine-tune it so that it was able to have really good predictive fire on longer range of opponents. So it could lock on and could strategically like hit people across the battlefield often before they could do a proper lock on me. So all I had to do was keep my distance. It was really fun. Anyway, I'm geeking out about it. I'm sorry.
つまり注意は今、両極端な機体を交互に乗っているわけ
Ooh, look
で
at that guy.
強化装備のデータがピンポン現象を、あ、
He's got quite a scar.
取り込み中すまないが、君、少し外してくれないか。
は、
岩谷中佐、いつおいでに。
Lieutenant Colonel Iwaya. Iwaya. Again, that name sounds familiar.
おい、作業中止だ。一旦退出しろ。
Hey, okay, hang on. Yeah, look at that. That view, that salute, I think that's a cover photo right there.
暮れに一度会ったきりか。もう2月とは。年を取ると時間が早くて困る。
It's funny because like it's February now.
装備選定や予算会議、大層お忙しいと伺っています。どうかお体だけはご自愛ください。
ああ、のんきに過ごすのは性に合わんよ。やるべきことは山ほどあるが、それが減った試しはないからな。
そうですね。
ところで、例のおもちゃの件だが。
Ah, the Railgun?
は、報告書の内容に何か不備がありましたか？
心配から入るとは相変わらずだな。安心しろ。報告書はよくできていた。
He probably wants to ask about your personal feelings, because I'm sure your report was very, professional and not personalized.
は、ありがとうございます。
むしろ、現場の努力に応えられていないことが申し訳ないくらいだ。量産に向けて動くという指針が決定したのも、先日の会議という体たらくさ。
Wait, so they're just talking about, like, for one thing, mass production, so, like, have they made a prototype yet? Because that's the first thing you do. How would you, I guess you could talk about the theoretics of, like, where you could produce something like the Railgun, but you've got to have a prototype first. So the higher-ups are still hesitant to proceed. Must be because of the links to Yokohama. Man, there's a lot of stigma with Yokohama. A weapon that could tip the scales in mankind's favor, the inner workings of which are privy only to the United Nations. Well, I guess there's also pressure from the Alternative 5 group that might be trying to suppress ideas that could step away from Operation Babylon. There's a reason numerous people in the development sector mockingly refer to the Railgun as a toy. It's not just to keep its existence a secret.
一型兵だけでも苦労しているところ申し訳ないが、貴様の中隊には引き続きおもちゃの面倒も見てもらおう。
Okay.
は、元よりその所存です。
うん。ところで、報告書にあった一型兵の回収要望を見たが、貴様はあの機体に並々ならぬ思い入れがあるようだな。
The Shiranuis looked interesting. My critique based on what I saw of the design was that while they had the more maneuverable style, like almost like jet style thrusters that we've seen on the newer models of TSFs, they almost look too big for the Shiranui. So I would feel like they might be prone to being damaged. Like we saw a lot of that. Like it looked like it didn't take much to take them out of commission. But again, this is all theoretical.
この陸軍近衛合同の一型兵評価プロジェクトにも志願したくらいだ。その思い入れは相当なものだろう。
刻々と悪化する佐渡島の状況を鑑みれば、零式の配備遅延を早急に補う必要があります。
佐渡島。
つなぎとはいえ、父が手掛けた82式の代替機です。その最有力候補が一型兵回収型であるなら、それは私の天命かと。
If I can't fight on the battlefield myself, the least I can do is complete the Shiranui 1C the Captain Senada and his men used to pilot.
なるほど。そこまで生きるなら、こちらも安心して頼めるってもんだ。
頼み？
人払いをしたのは、ここからの話のためだ。実は、先日の装備調達会議での話だが。
Oh, interesting. Ah, we don't get to hear it out, right? Equipment.
以上のように、平原、森林、市街地、背部などの戦闘条件において、指定救急型電磁投射法は、極めて高い全面制圧能力を発揮すると結論付けて、問題ないと考えます。
Hey, Kawasaki Industries. Yeah. That's starting to sound familiar. 5 days before. 6th Conference Room, Imperial Ministry of Defense.
また、高村中尉の報告書にある不具合に関しても、量産までには全て解消できる見通しであります。以上です。
その解決する見通しとやらこそ、具体的に聞きたいものだな。
具体策につきましては、目下検討中です。数値は全てお渡ししてありますので、それをご参照いただければと。
冷却装置以上に重大な問題があるだろう。速射機構。あれはどう解決するつもりだ？
The quick firing mechanism. What was the issue with it?
あ、速射機構の問題とおっしゃいますと。
I'm glad I'm not the only one confused.
救急型砲の心臓部は横浜絡みのものだと聞く。だとすれば、それ自体がブラックボックスなのではないかね。
So I think what he's meaning by a black box is that part of its development is in its very nature because it's associated with Yokohama, aka beta technology, which is kind of like the big secret of Yokohama is utilizing G weapons and like creating new technologies from beta elements, which is why it's so hush hush because like people would kind of freak out at the idea, you know? But by having it be a black box, it means that you could design this thing, equip it, and ship it out, but only people who have like top security clearance would even have an inkling of how it actually works. So you'd be talking about deploying a high priority weapon into the battlefield under command of people who don't understand or have a concept of what it is. And the reason why he's probably going to bring this up is he's going to complain that why are we not worried about potential risks involving Yokohama-based technology that we have to deploy on soldiers without knowing the risk factor? Like, are they essentially strapping these bombs to themselves? Could, like, if something goes wrong, can we even compensate or know what we can expect? Like, I can see hesitation there if we can't even truly understand what this technology is, nor can we even share it if we did know.
横浜ああ、また女ですな。
That woman.
なるほど。厄介そうな話だ。
I like how like everyone was like,
それが本件にどのような
Yoko!
形で関係していると。
は、私の調べたところによると、メーカーは第4計画から受託した電磁投射砲の設計、製造技術を丸々救急型開発に流用しているようです。
Oh, interesting. So, alternative force technology has been misappropriated. Like I said, my theory was that the railgun was kind of a bone that Yoko Sensei was likely throwing to the UN to kind of try and stall to give her time to develop the Unit Zero. And so that's my guess, but maybe it wasn't entirely that. Maybe somebody operating outside of her direct chain of command did something.
設計どころか、心臓部は丸々横浜製という情報もある。
Okay. Yep, that's the cue right there. Beta technology, because they need the hive core in order to build it.
となると、やはり例の元素ですか。
Yep, yep.
それが関わる以上、あのメギツネはまた難癖をつけていろいろな要求をしてくるはずだ。救急型砲はそのリスクに見合うのかね。
Hence, it's the bone she's throwing them. Like, she's literally, because she holds all the cards when it comes to something like this, they're like, are we willing to give her this much power over our battlefields when she's been proven to be very demanding and controlling of everything she touches?
それは。
ご指摘の件ですが、すでに問題は解決済みであります。ご安心ください。そもそも、この技術の流用は先方からのご提案です。難癖をつけられる筋ではありません。
Okay. So, they're saying that because she's involved, like, they can at least trust that this isn't an underhand deal. They're like, she has a tight-fisted control over everything that comes out of Yokohama.
こちらに貸しを作っておこうという魂胆ですか。
Well, that's true. She doesn't have a heart. That's part of what makes her so brilliant, is that she does not have, like, she cares, she has emotions, but she's very good about compartmentalizing those.
であるなら、横浜に関しての心配は救急型実用化のめどが立ってからすれば良いと。仮を作る作らないの選択権はこちらにあるというわけですな。
Man, though, can you believe, like, after seeing, like, how effective the railgun is, that they are still, like, hesitant to even owe her favors? Like, I don't even think these people are actual direct enemies of hers. They just don't like how... I mean, it's one of those things where, like, when someone's being incredibly successful and is, like, a genius, there tends to generate a lot of misgiving attitudes. I mean, look at Amadeus Mozart. He was a genius of music, but it made him a lot of enemies. Not just because he was kind of crazy, but, like, because it's hard to know how to handle somebody like that. And they kind of take convention and throw it against the winds. And so, like, traditional chains of command, working your way up the ladder, just don't apply to geniuses of that caliber. And it can really mess with egos and perceptions and anticipations. And, like, it can make people nervous. It can make people feel like they're unpredictable. It can make people jealous. It's really interesting because they're capturing this idea really well. Again, like, I think it captures kind of what the attitudes you saw around Amadeus and about how he was perceived, and even like the idea that, like, when he died, like, a lot of people believed that one of his contemporaries, whom he like overshadowed, might have killed him. And, like, even if there was no evidence for it, it became so believable that it kind of became true in a way. Like, it ruined the man's reputation, even if he had nothing to do with it.
和田摘みの後継機には、より強力な火力が求められている。たとえ横浜絡みといえど、
欲しくないと言えば嘘になるか。
Yeah, it makes sense.
議長、決を。
案件102。姿勢救急型電磁投射法に関しては、現状のまま、量産を前提に開発を継続とする。
The assumption of mass production, because they also don't know, Yuko could easily say like, oh, we can't do a mass production. I can most make you like 10. It might be, if it's made of G elements, like there's probably a very strict limit, and she's hoarding a lot of that G elements for her Susanoo. So that could be a big choke point and a cause of concern, because nobody really knows what she's working on with the Susanoo, how it's supposed to work, or why it needs just so much extreme resources. We now know, but they don't know. And Yuko's not going to tell them that. And so heavily restricting the output, like she gets a lot of G elements, like kind of given to her pretty much, like it's so hard to gather the material, and it's all like kind of sent down to her essentially. And then she doesn't seem to produce anything with it, but promises and vague, like assumptions, you know?
スケジュールの詳細に関しては、担当官と相談をしてくれたまえ。では、次の案件。
It's really cool to see the politics from this side. It's like, this is the part we never got exposed to, and it's really interesting.
案件121、94式1型兵の回収要望についてでありますが、残念ながら今回のご要望すべてを実現するのは難しいと言わざるを得ません。
Gotcha. So it's like, it's part of making the testing to try and make that build viable. And so far they're hitting a roadblock where it just might not be feasible.
ご存知のように、原型機である94式は極めて困難な要求仕様を実現するため、量産機としては異例なほど突き詰めた設計がなされた機体です。
So the Type 94 is more, it's like, it's almost in design philosophy is closer to Takuma Kazuchi in the sense that like it's designed to be a high performance, essentially a Cadillac or a Porsche, rather than like a Honda, like a typical, like something that's easily mass produced and something that's kind of built from the ground up to be accessible. These are built to be more specified and to be more, like tailored, you could almost say. But that it walks a fine line then between, is it like a sports car where it's tough to maintain, expensive to maintain, and hard to produce in mass, but it's also on the cheaper side, so it's manageable and built from parts that are more universal. It's an interesting conundrum, actually.
したがって、通常は考慮される将来的発展を確保する構造的冗長性についても、極限まで削ぎ落とされています。
Ah, another one too. That's interesting. Structural redundancies being reduced to minimum. That might be why they seem so delicate in the simulator, because redundancies are premier for trying to anticipate problems. I mean, when NASA develops spacecraft, redundancy is the name of the game. Like, you have backup for your backups. You test for every bit and piece of your product, because they learn quickly that even small issues can quickly cascade into really big issues when you're involving something of that, like, well, craft with that much power and magnitude behind them. And so structural redundancies make it so that even if you take damage, you're more likely to still be functional, at least mostly functional. Take that away, and one decent hit could completely cripple your entire craft, even if it was on a limb, because it could offset the balance so much.
であるから、回収は不可能だと。
物理的に不可能ではありません。ですが、94式を回収しようとする場合、在来機に比べ根本的かつ大規模な改造を行う必要があります。
So if they try to make these changes, it essentially would be starting over.
それを行うには当然、多くの時間と労力、そして資金と資源をそのためだけに費やさねばならない。
It's tough too, because like you want to make sure that you can easily field these crafts, but you also have to understand that like you need to maximize survivability, because at this stage, TSFs are easier to get their hands on than pilots. Like, that's not great, because these are hard to make, but pilots are a more, like, they're a tougher resource because of the amount of training that you need to put into them. Like, it's not just like a numbers thing, it's also a man-hours thing. Building a TSF is easy compared to training a pilot. So, like, you'd want to preserve the life of as many pilots as possible.
我が国で戦術機開発が可能な富岳と三菱。そして弊社は、来たるべき佐渡島奪回。そして大陸反攻に備え、94式の後継たる次期主力機開発にその持てる力の全てを注いでいます。ベータの物量をものともしない、より強力な新型機の開発と、運用に問題があるわけでもない94式の困難な改修。トレードオフに全く値しないものと考えますが、いかがでしょ
う。So he's saying that the Shiranui, the C1, isn't new enough or powerful enough to put this much resource into. Well, then what does he want? Like, I thought this was cutting edge.
仮に、要求をすべて満たした回収機が完成したとしても、次期主力機の要求仕様には遠く及ばないということを付け加えさせていただきます。
Okay, so the C1 is still built on the original framework of the Shiranui. So what they're talking about here is they're talking about upgrading current Shiranuis. I thought they were developing a brand new one. But what they're saying is like, what do we strip away what we have, kind of keeping the frame of the Shiranui, but then giving these parts upgrades and making a better TSF, which is good. But he's saying, like, look, that's going to take so much resources, so much development, so much, like, procedure. It's like, why don't we just build new TSFs instead? And, like, have something that's more keeping up with things like the Raptor or the, what's the one in Europe? I can't remember. I always forget its name. But the new TSF, like, maybe they feel the Shiranui, even in the C form, is just too far behind the recent TSF developments of other nations.
とはいえ、77式の耐用年数も考慮せねばならぬ今、何も手を打たずにいるわけにはいかん。
Type 77 Gekishin. Like, that's the older model, if I remember correctly.
いや、しかし、77式の大隊機は97式というのが今期防衛大綱の。
Okay, the Type 97.
手記の換装が必要になる。94式の回収が難しいのであれば、97式とて同じことだ。
だとすれば、必要な機体が国内調達できない以上、外国機の導入も検討すべきでしょうな。
That's gonna make people upset.
何を言う？対ベータ主力装備である戦術機は国産であるべきという結論は、それこそ94式開発の。
He's saying because again, like Japan desperately doesn't want to rely on other nations. They want to be able to could say like, look, we can handle ourselves.
議長。
何かね、岩谷中佐。
召喚に一つ、愚策があります。
Oh? Oh, interesting.
そんな、外国機導入など問題外です。
Oh, okay. So now he's saying, like, what if we design a new TSF incorporating design language from foreign, but keeping it in-house? So he's kind of saying, what if we hybridize?
我が国には独自の戦略に基づいた戦術機運用理論があります。それは先達が積み重ねてきた血と汗の結晶であり、たとえ
And that would mean a lot to her because it's her family's, like, legacy that's kind of up for grabs. So he would essentially be saying, like, we're gonna give up on the path that your family set us down and incorporate foreign stuff.
失礼しました。どのような厳罰も受ける所存です。
Okay, calm down. You don't need to crucify yourself. Disgraceful. Let my indignation get the better of me and mouthed off to a superior officer. Fair. I guess that is a fair point. Honestly, I'm spoiled by Lieutenant Colonel Iwaya. He's been formally appointed as the guardian of and sole heir of House Takamura, but our bond goes deeper than that. Lieutenant Colonel Iwaya was father's dearest friend, and he loves me like a daughter ever since I was a child. To think that he's done all he's done for me after father's ultimate untimely death, and this is how I repay him? How wretched I am. I like Colonel Iwaya. I know I've heard him before.
岩谷中佐。
そう来ると思ったよ。まったく相変わらずだな。 ゆいちゃんよ。
Aw.
おやめください、中佐。今は任務中です。
よく考えろ。なぜ俺が結論を先に言わなかったと思う？
Now that he mentions it, Lieutenant Colonel Iwaya never beats around the bush, so why did he start off by recounting what happened during the meeting from the beginning?
Oh.
He was probing my reaction to see why I was being so coy.
気づいたようだな。
He played you like a fiddle, girl.
は一度ならず二度までも感情に流され、立て続けに失態を晒す低たらく。近衛の誉れと高村の加盟を汚し続ける我が身が口惜しく。
やれやれ。その過ぎた自制癖も、そろそろ卒業したらどうだい？己を律することと縛ることは全く違う。いちいち大げさに抱え込んでは身が持たんぞ。
は、申し訳ありません。
お前は死んだ親父さんにそっくりだが、あいつもそういうところは似てほしくないと思っているはずだ。
斧が未熟、重ね重ね、恥じるばかりです。
まあ、悔やむなとは言わん。だが、せめてそれを面には出すな。部下や周囲がそれを気取れば不安を呼ぶ。指揮官であれ、当主であれ、上に立つ者は大きく構えていなければな。
近衛と高村の名に恥じぬよう少年を叩き直し、精進します。ご助言、ありがとうございました。
まだ固いな。だが、根本から変わる必要はない。お前らしさが一切なくなるのは、高村家にとっても、近衛にとっても損失だ。人間変わろうなんて無理な話さ。別人のように振る舞える自分を、ありのままの自分に加えればいい。何事も塩梅が寛容というわけだ。
Yui looks like the kind of person who struggles to be anything but like consistently like in the moment. She doesn't seem like one to have daydreams. She doesn't seem like the kind of person to easily laugh or to mess around. She's deathly serious. She takes everything on herself and feels like she needs to be accountable for everything that she does. And while that's a good attitude to have, it's definitely not one that makes a healthy mental attitude. It gives her resilience, but it's an imbalance. Like, it's okay to like have a personality and to let yourself be. Like, look at Colonel Iwaya. Like, he's being personable and saying, like, look, cast aside our rankings here. We're family friends. Like, I've known you for a long time. You've known me for a long time. It's okay to trust in those instincts. It's okay to like be yourself and to understand the like having emotional outbursts, having reactions, even if it feels inappropriate at times, it's still very human. He's trying to kind of like help her understand, like, look, it's okay. Like, you don't need to crucify yourself for doing something like this. Maybe in other situations it would be inappropriate, but especially with me, it's not that big of a deal.
塩梅。
人であれ何であれ、確一化したものは純粋で鋭く、強固であり、美しい。だが、それゆえに危うく脆いものさ。
I love that phrase. That which does not bend breaks. It's actually very, that's a very fitting to he brings up iron, because metals and what makes metals so unique was upon so a forging material is the fact that they tend to bend before they break. You can make metals brittle, like if you don't balance them properly, especially when creating alloys, you can make them brittle so they just snap. But a finely crafted sword, like a samurai sword, like a blade, the edge is hardened specifically so that it keeps its sharpness, but the back of the blade is intentionally left to be loose so that it can actually absorb and distribute energy across the entire blade. If you harden the entire length of the blade like you harden the edge, the entire sword would snap and shatter like glass if it were under a significant pressure. But what makes the sword so like robust is having that essentially that core that's adaptable and the edge that is fine. The same thing could be said for Western swords. Samurai swords are more stylish and they definitely had a more traditional but kind of more perfected method towards their crafting than I believe we really saw in like Western culture. But even so, like having like broadswords, like the idea is having two fine edges, but then a core, and the core of the blade was purposely meant to be more flexible to kind of give support and edge, like just support to the edge that was toughened. It's a blend, it's a balance.
そういうものなのでしょうか。
I doubt an unprecedented national crisis, a situation that demands swift and decisive action, is a time for self-reflection and soul-searching. I disagree!
何？おいおいわかるさ。ところでどうだ？せっかく人払いをしたんだ。久しぶりに岩屋のおじさまとでも呼んでみるか？
Oji-sama.
岩谷中佐。
あれこれ考えず、思い切って形から入るのも大事だぞ。
After so many years, Uncle Iwaya still runs rings around me. I doubt I'll ever reach his level. He's been around ever since I was a baby, and in that time, he's accomplished more than I ever could with my wildest dreams as both a surface pilot and weapons developer. A distinguished veteran and a peerless weapon developer, Uncle Iwaya's fame spread far and wide that his name is spoken with reverence across the Royal Guard, the Army, and the Navy, three branches of the Imperial forces consistently at odds with each other.
ずいぶん話が逸れてしまったが、お前さんをからかうためだけに人払いまでしてあんな話を聞かせたわけじゃない。
はい。
貴様はさっき外国機の導入はもってのほかと言っていたが、なぜだ？
国家安全保障の要を諸外国の影響下に置く危険性は70年代の F4 ショックを見れば一目瞭然です。
I'm not exactly sure what she's referencing to, but like my guess would be that like if you have to service all of your parts from foreign entities, the instant there's a bottleneck, and like so say we ship TSS from the US, right? Get all the parts and everything from the US, which is actually kind of what happens for a lot of air forces around the world. We tend to sell a majority stake in a lot of like military tech to our allies, and they don't tend to have infrastructure to design their own. Just typically, it's part of the times and everything. It makes a lot of sense. But think about this. So they have a high need for TSFs in Japan. They have a high need for TSFs in America, but not as immediate because they don't tend to fend off beta attacks nearly as much as the Japanese. But what if something happened? What if there was an emergency or a new beta colony spawned near the North American continent, and America suddenly has a need to fight off with TSFs? There's a limited supply of parts, and two nations that need it. Who do you think is going to be getting the parts? It's going to be the United States. That leaves Japan high and dry the instant it's not convenient for the force that provides the parts and services for that machine. Having independence in this regard, including having your own factories and designs and understanding the intimate building philosophies and structures of the TSFs, allows you for adaptability. I mean, think about what happened the day after. When they had so little resources, they had to kind of cobble together what they could. You couldn't do that with a machine you didn't understand intimately. Being able to know where you can cut corners, being able to know where you can harvest parts that might be serviceable, even if they're not technically the original design purpose for that type of part or that location. It's all about being able to have that control and being able to have the access to resources immediately. That's what I think is the big problem, is like if you rely on another country and it becomes inconvenient for that country in any way, you get screwed.
当時唯一の戦術機生産国であったアメリカの思惑により F4 の日本割り当て分が欧州戦線に回されたこと。
There you go.
その事実と屈辱が帝国の国産開発を強力に推進させ、今その能力を得るに至った以上、外国機導入が問題外であるのは自明です。まして、帝国は世界に先駆け第三世代機を実戦投入しています。我が国の要求仕様を満たす機体は我が国にしか存在しないと確信しています。
There's definitely bias there. Excuse me. There's definitely bias there. But she's not wrong.
では、メーカー連中の言い分はどうだ？
はあ、それもまた現実であることは重々認識しています。それゆえ私は、知らぬ一型兵を最大効率で回収すべく、この試験プロジェクトに身を投じたのです。
I would argue, though, that despite all the energy they put into it, a large portion of testing is to determine whether the effort is worth it. And if that determination is that, you know, the Shiba Nui 1C is fine, but we could build a better TSF from the ground up rather than trying to improve what we currently have just because of the amount of resources and technicalities that gets involved. If that becomes like the end result, that's a good thing. Just because it feels like a failure doesn't mean anything. The testing is important because you want to make sure that it's worth the investment. And learning that it's not worth the investment and moving on to something else is a success. It doesn't feel like it for those who are involved in the design process, sure, but in the large scale, it is. Failing of a test is critical to developing proper technology. Like, what was it that I don't like? Edison was kind of a scumbag, but he had a great saying where he talked about the development of the electric light bulb. People asked him why did he keep developing, why did he keep trying to build a light bulb when he failed because he reported oh yeah, we had over 1,000 designs before we found the design that worked. And someone said how did you have the tenacity to keep going when you failed time and time again? He said, look, I didn't fail to make I didn't fail to make a light bulb. I learned 999 ways not to make a light bulb. It's the same principle. Failure is a part of data collection and learning about what's worth investing in, what's worth developing, what's worth pursuing.
1型兵を熟練兵士でなくとも扱える機体にすることが叶えば、より多くの兵士が戦場に生きながらえ、その背後にあるさらに多くの命を守ると信じています。
But are you 100% certain that a new TSF design wouldn't be able to accomplish the same thing?
貴様の考え、信念、すべて分かった。
は。
これまで聞かせてもらった言葉、すべて二言はないな。
は。近衛と高村の名にかけて。
高村中尉。
は。
貴様の戦術機に対する知識と技能、そして国産機にかけるその思いを見込んで特別任務を与える。
Is he going to demand more practical testing and not just in simulators?
特別任務でありますか？
そうだ。貴様にはアラスカへ飛んでもらう。
アラスカ？
He's sending me to the United States? Why? No way. He's axing me from the project?
貴様は来月付で国連軍に転属。
So it's only for a month. But I belong to the Royal Guard. This is unheard of.
アメリカ合衆国アラスカ州国連太平洋方面第3軍ユーコン陸軍基地に赴任し、クラウスハルトウィック大佐機下のプロミネンス計画に参画。
Project Prominence.
日本帝国の開発主任として XFJ 計画を推進するのだ。
Oh, okay. Dude, that is a promotion.
XFJ 計画。
ああ。日米共同の1型兵改修計画だ。94式のベースモデルである F15 の機能拡張ノウハウを持つボーニング社が協力してくれる。
Oh, okay. So, the stopgate here, like I said, is that look, our current system design isn't looking super positive, but we don't want to rely on foreign design. What if we just married the two? What if we took what we have and upgraded it with the parts that are more that could be considered more efficient from the United States? Well, it kind of leans in this whole reliance on foreign nations. If it's done properly, we could easily start building these parts through Boeing in Japan. You know, it's kind of almost like what car companies do now. Like a lot of companies like Toyota, Subaru, and their Japanese-based products often are a fusion of design philosophies between the United States and Japan. Boeing? So we won't be working with American Armed Forces, but with a private American defense contractor.
ユーコンでは現在、先進戦術機技術開発計画、通称プロミネンス計画が進行中だ。ボーニングは独自に F15 の第3世代アップグレード技術検証を行っている。
Interesting.
そこに便乗させてもらうというわけだ。外国機導入はせず、国内リソースも使わず、ベータの脅威に備え、機種転換の遅延をカバーするには、これ以外に手はない。
So he's saying it's kind of a marriage because it would cost too many resources to do everything domestically, and it is not incorporating and just importing like machinery into us, but it would be based on parts designed by Boeing, which could still be kind of, but like the hybrid model might be the best course.
ですが中佐、それでは。
言っただろう。確一化は脆いと。知らぬい改修の手詰まりは、国粋主義に凝り固まった結果ではないか。
So he's saying that is our pride what holds us back from being successful at developing the Shiranui Sea. Hate to admit it, but he may be right. No, he is right.
このままでは、いずれ帝国全体が知らぬいと同じ道をたどる。私は、そう確信している。貴様の気持ちもわかる。一方的な安保条約破棄や、明星作戦での独断専行。帝国武人であれば、少なからず遺恨があろう。
Yeah, so they had the treaty, and then when they dropped the bomb without telling Japan, they turned and said like, screw the treaty, throw it out the window, we're doing what we want. Nah, like I can understand why that really doesn't make them very fond of Americans in this line.
特に貴様は、それによって親を失っている以上、仇も同然。アメリカ企業と手を組むことは、いかに命令とはいえ、心中穏やかではあるまい。
Interesting. I didn't realize that her dad died in that operation. Ooh. It's almost as if you were reading my mind. But it's personal for him too. Lieutenant Colonel Iwai lost his dearest friend that day. Parents or comrades in arms, it doesn't matter. Both are irreplaceable. Now that I've experienced combat for myself, I understand this all too well. And this man, someone who shares my suffering, is telling me to work with the Americans? The anger must be eating him inside, no different from the frustration I felt the day I witnessed the beta trample over everything I held dear. Nevertheless, he rises above it all. Uncle is single-mindedly devoted to the survival of the Empire. Yes, I see it clearly. The time has come to pay back this outstanding debt of gratitude.
XFJ 計画、並びに開発主任の儀、謹んで拝命いたします。
Interesting. It's interesting.
よろしく頼むぞ。
Like, she's being put in charge. I wonder if she, like, as part of her training, has, like almost an engineer's background, or she simply is more of just a good representative who understands the market, but maybe not the nuts and bolts of it. Like, she's, like, been trained to be an administrator, or she actually has, like, engineering technical know-how and has the ability to recommend, change, and even adapt specs, like, on her own initiative.
は、お任せください。
正式な命令と詳細は後日になる。準備し始めるのはその後でいい。
中佐、質問があります。
なんだ？
転属後、私の中隊はどうなるのでしょうか？
Oh, that's right. She's probably going to be leaving behind her own personal squad.
心配するな。さっきも言ったように、引き続きおもちゃの開発を継続してもらう。雨宮中尉が指揮権を引き継ぐことになるだろう。
Based on what Amamiya was wearing, it sounds like she is part of the guard as well. Like they're very similar in station, so it kind of makes sense that she could operate on her own. That sucks though. You're like, look at these friends you've learned to come and trust. Bye. Gotta go and learn with a whole new group. Oh, look at that. You don't see planes very often. Interesting. You know, I think we're going to leave it here for now. Hang on, let me just get rid of the noise a bit. I think this is a good place for us to end. I know I rambled a lot, but I think it was valid ramblings. I think it was on point, wasn't too distracting at all. And we've got a good setup for what's happening here. So now she's traveling to Alaska and she's going to be joining this UN task force, which will be interesting. I'm curious to see how this is all going to play out, especially because it's a collaborative event of engineers and developers, which is a part of like the universe that we haven't seen a ton of. Like we've seen references to it for sure, but we've never seen a whole lot of nuts and bolts research when it comes to it. Even when we had like access to all the stuff Yuko Sensei's doing on the Yokohama base, Takaru wasn't really invested in a lot of that. He just kind of heard about it. We didn't actually see a lot of development process or testing. So I'm curious to see, because again, like the day after showed us a lot of the political intrigue and like stuff that goes on. So I wonder if we're going to see a lot about like we've already seen a good amount about design and trouble that comes up where you have clashing needs with engineering initiatives and resources and deployments and all of that. So I'm curious to see if we get to see that continue to be explored as a concept. So that'll be really fun. Yeah, so color me intrigued. I always love Muv-Luv. This is going in a direction that's really interesting, especially because for me, like I grew up in a home with an engineer. My dad was a mechanical engineer. He's actually one of the he's like a premier specialist in his field, and he is often brought on for consulting work across broad spectrums of different types of companies and needs and necessities. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's worked for Boeing in the past. So there's almost like a personal connection I can have with this type of stuff because I watched my father be involved in projects like this. So it's really interesting to see that. I'm looking forward to seeing how it's broken down, and again, how in depth we get to go with this, or if it's still going to focus so purely on like the people, and it's not going to like do much besides like make references to the research. But I'm getting that feeling that just like the day after, like there's a lot of like perspective that they want to build into this. It's not solely about characters. So we'll get there when we get there. Anyway, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for joining me on the channel as always. And until next video, go watch me up. See me next. I'll see you there.